Well, today marked day 4 of testimony in the Nathan Chasing Horse trial, with jurors hearing from Metro police detectives and continued testimony from alleged victims and their family members.
Prosecutors walked jurors through the search of Chasing Horse's Las Vegas home and how police identified him during their investigation.
Trisha and Abel, today was largely about how this case came together, with jurors hearing from several Metro police detectives who described what they found during a search of Nathan Chasing Horse's home.
For years, people saw him as a healer, a respected Native American actor who stood beside Hollywood legends and spoke about spirituality, guidance, and trust. But prosecutors say behind that image was a predator hiding in plain sight.
The Las Vegas jury has found actor Nathan Chasing Horse guilty of more than a dozen counts of sexual assault of a minor.
Women and young girls believed he had supernatural power over them, until investigators uncovered what they described as a cult built on fear, manipulation, and abuse. And when the courtroom finally heard the victims speak, everything changed. Nathan Chasing Horse first became famous after appearing in the iconic film Dances with Wolves. To the public, he seemed calm, spiritual, and deeply respected within Native American communities. But according to prosecutors, that reputation became the perfect cover for something far darker. Investigators say he spent years manipulating vulnerable women and girls through fear and control, creating a hidden world that remained secret until multiple victims finally came forward and exposed everything. At first, Nathan Chasing Horse didn't look like someone investigators would ever suspect. To many people, he appeared respected, spiritual, and deeply connected to Native American traditions. After gaining recognition from Dances with Wolves, he continued building an image around healing, wisdom, and guidance. He spoke about spirituality with confidence, and over time, many people began trusting him not just as an actor, but as a leader. And according to prosecutors, that trust became his greatest weapon. Investigators later claimed Chasing Horse slowly built a network of followers who believed he possessed spiritual power. Young women and girls were allegedly drawn toward him, seeking guidance, protection, or healing during vulnerable periods in their lives. But prosecutors say what they entered was something far more dangerous. According to court documents, loyalty inside the group was expected without question. Victims later described an environment built around fear, obedience, and manipulation. Several alleged they were made to believe disobeying Nathan Chasing Horse could bring spiritual consequences not only upon themselves, but on their families as well. That fear allegedly kept many victims silent for years. Some later told investigators they believed they had no escape. Others said they were emotionally manipulated into believing the abuse was somehow connected to spirituality or destiny. And as more victims began coming forward, investigators noticed something chilling. The stories sounded incredibly similar. Even when victims spoke separately, many described the same patterns of control, the same manipulation tactics, and the same fear surrounding Nathan Chasing Horse. That consistency quickly transformed the investigation into something much larger. Law enforcement agencies across multiple jurisdictions became involved. Detectives gathered testimonies, reviewed evidence, and slowly began piecing together what prosecutors later described as a long-running pattern of exploitation hidden behind spiritual influence. Then, in early 2023, everything collapsed. Nathan Chasing Horse was arrested in Nevada. The image of the once respected spiritual figure standing in handcuffs instantly shocked people across the country. For many, it was difficult to reconcile the public persona they had seen for years with the allegations investigators were now describing. But according to prosecutors, the evidence was overwhelming. As courtroom proceedings began, jurors heard deeply emotional testimony from alleged victims who described years of manipulation and abuse. Investigators walked the court through how the case unfolded and why they believe Chasing Horse used his influence to maintain power over vulnerable individuals. The prosecution argued this was not misunderstanding, not confusion, not consensual relationships distorted over time. They claimed it was a calculated system of control. And as the trial continued, the courtroom became increasingly tense. One of the most controversial moments came when the defense called a neurologist to testify regarding explicit video evidence tied to the investigation. The doctor told jurors he believed the individual shown in the footage appeared physically developed and post-pubescent, but prosecutors immediately challenged the testimony. They pointed out the neurologist had no expertise in pediatrics and had never examined a prepubescent child professionally. The prosecution argued the testimony lacked proper foundation and attempted to weaken the seriousness of the charges. Then another witness took the stand, Shia Chasing Horse, described as a distant cousin of Nathan Chasing Horse, testified she personally never witnessed abuse involving one of the alleged victims. For the defense, testimonies like this were critical. Attorneys worked aggressively to challenge the credibility of the accusations. They argued the prosecution's narrative was incomplete and exaggerated. At one point, the defense even accused investigators of improper conduct involving financial assistance provided to a witness. The courtroom tension escalated as both sides fought over credibility, motive, and truth. But behind every legal argument was a much bigger question hanging over the trial. Were the victims finally exposing a hidden predator? Or was the defense correct in claiming the case had been distorted beyond reality? As the trial moved deeper into testimony, prosecutors focused on one central argument. Nathan Chasing Horse carefully built an image designed to give him power over vulnerable people. They argued his reputation as a spiritual figure allowed him to gain trust quickly, especially among young women searching for guidance, healing, or belonging. According to prosecutors, once that trust was established, fear and manipulation kept victims trapped for years, and then came the verdict. One by one, the courtroom listened as the jury's decisions were read aloud. Guilty, guilty. Several charges involving sexual assault of minors resulted in convictions. Other charges returned not guilty verdicts, but prosecutors had already secured what they believed proved the larger pattern of abuse they described throughout the case. Inside the courtroom, the emotional weight became overwhelming. For many victims, this was the first time they had publicly confronted the man they accused of controlling and exploiting them for years. Some delivered heartbreaking impact statements describing how deeply the abuse affected every part of their lives long after it ended. One victim told the court Nathan Chasing Horse robbed her of her innocence and the childhood she should have had. Another explained how the trauma followed her into adulthood, shaping relationships, self-worth, and even her sense of safety. She described losing milestones most people take for granted, experiences she believed were permanently stolen from her. And as those statements filled the courtroom, the image prosecutors painted throughout the trial became impossible to ignore. This wasn't just a criminal case about isolated accusations. According to the prosecution, it was about influence being weaponized against vulnerable people who believed they were following someone spiritually powerful. The defense continued arguing against the harshest punishment. Attorneys questioned witness reliability, challenged investigative decisions, and maintained that the prosecution exaggerated parts of the narrative surrounding Nathan Chasing Horse. But by that point, the jury had already reached its conclusion. The convictions confirmed what prosecutors argued from the beginning, that this was a deliberate pattern of exploitation hidden behind trust and authority. Then came sentencing. The courtroom fell silent as the judge addressed Nathan Chasing Horse directly. The court acknowledged the long-term psychological damage suffered by victims and the seriousness of abusing influence in such a calculated way. "You preyed on these women's trust." Those words echoed through the courtroom moments before the final sentence was delivered. Nathan Chasing Horse was sentenced to decades in prison. The court imposed a sentence of 37 years to life, with parole eligibility beginning only after a minimum of 25 years served. For prosecutors, the sentence was not only punishment, it was protection, a guarantee, they argued, that he would never again have the opportunity to manipulate or control vulnerable people the way investigators alleged he had for years. The case quickly became one of the most disturbing examples of alleged spiritual manipulation and abuse in recent memory. It forced difficult conversations about power, trust, and how easily influence can be weaponized behind closed doors. Because one of the most unsettling parts of this case was how ordinary it appeared from the outside. To many people, Nathan Chasing Horse looked respected, trusted, even admired. And yet prosecutors argued something far darker was happening underneath that image the entire time. For the victims, the verdict represented validation after years of silence and fear. But for many watching the case unfold, one question still remains. How many similar situations never get exposed at all? How many people stay silent because fear, manipulation, or influence keeps them trapped? And how often do dangerous individuals hide behind positions of trust without anyone realizing it until years later? If you want more deeply researched, true crime courtroom stories covering shocking investigations, disturbing testimony, and controversial verdicts, stay tuned for the next case. And after hearing the details in this story, do you believe predators who abuse spiritual or community influence should face even harsher punishment?